Admiral Deho walked through the ruins of the Council's primary facility on Nexus Prime. 2 weeks had passed since the Great Battle, and the galaxy was learning what freedom truly meant. Around him, beings from dozens of species worked together to dismantle the massive psychic dampening arrays that had controlled galactic civilization for 30,000 years. But the work was harder than anyone had expected. "Sir," called Dr. So-Young from where she was examining a control panel. "We have a problem. The Council's systems are more integrated than we thought. If we simply destroy them, we'll also eliminate the communication networks, the transportation systems, even the weather control systems on hundreds of worlds." Admiral Deho nodded grimly. This was the choice he had feared they would have to make. How many worlds would be affected? Over 3,000 directly? Maybe 10,000 more would lose essential services within a few months. Captain Miran joined them at the control station. At 28, she was the youngest human to command a starship, and she represented the generation that would have to live with whatever choice they made today. "Admiral," she said, "the awakened species are asking for guidance. They want to know whether to keep the Council systems running or tear them down completely. What do you think we should do, Captain?" Miran was quiet for a moment, studying the complex displays that showed the Council's influence across the galaxy. "I think we need to give each world the choice. Some places might want to keep the systems and modify them. Others might prefer to start over from nothing. That could lead to chaos," Dr. So-Young warned. "Some systems might fail catastrophically. Entire populations could be at risk." "Yes," Miran agreed. "But that's what freedom means, isn't it? The right to succeed or fail based on your own choices." Admiral Deho smiled. The young captain understood something that even he sometimes forgot. Freedom wasn't just about removing chains. It was about accepting the responsibility that came with being unchained. "Send a message to all awakened worlds," he decided. "Tell them the choice is theirs. We'll provide technical support and assistance, but each species must decide for itself how much of the Council's legacy to keep and how much to discard." The response from across the galaxy was immediate and varied. Some worlds chose to maintain the Council systems while modifying them for local control. Others decided to tear everything down and rebuild from scratch. A few chose to keep some systems while eliminating others. On Kepler 7, the Carillions decided to keep the weather control systems, but eliminate the communication monitoring networks. On Vega Station, the traders chose to scrap everything, Council-related, and build new systems, based on their recovered ancient designs. But the most important discovery came from Dr. So-Young's continued analysis of the Council's technology. "Admiral," she called from her laboratory 3 days later, "you need to see this. I've been studying the psychic dampening technology, trying to understand how it worked." Admiral Deho joined her at her workstation, where complex diagrams showed the flow of mental energy across the galaxy. The Council wasn't just suppressing thoughts and memories, Dr. So-Young continued. They were harvesting the mental energy they suppressed and using it to power their own civilization. Every creative thought that was prevented, every moment of curiosity that was stifled, every dream that was forgotten, all of that energy was being collected and transmitted outside the galaxy. To where? To their home dimension. "Admiral, the Council wasn't just conquering galaxies. They were farming them. Every galaxy they controlled was feeding their expansion into new realities. The implications were staggering. The galaxy hadn't just been enslaved. It had been used as a power source to enslave other galaxies." "How many other galaxies?" Admiral Deho asked. Dr. So-Young pointed to her data displays. "Based on the energy flow patterns, at least 47 that we can detect. There may be hundreds more." Captain Miran, who had been listening to the conversation, spoke up. "Then our job isn't finished. We can't just free our own galaxy and leave the others enslaved." Admiral Deho looked at the young captain with respect. "What are you suggesting?" "We need to find a way to reach those other galaxies. We need to share what we've learned about breaking free from Council control. That could take thousands of years. It might be impossible." "Maybe," Miran replied. "But isn't that what the Council said about our return to this galaxy? They said we were extinct, that we would never be a threat again." They were wrong. Over the following weeks, the debate raged across the galaxy. Some species wanted to focus on rebuilding their own civilizations. Others argued for reaching out to help enslaved galaxies. A few suggested that the galaxy should prepare defenses in case other Council forces arrived. The solution came from an unexpected source. Elder Wu Jin, the ancient human who had remained in the galaxy during the long exile, made a proposal at the first Galactic Freedom Assembly. "We don't have to choose just one path," he said to the gathered representatives from hundreds of species. "The galaxy is large enough and diverse enough to pursue all of these goals simultaneously." "How?" asked Captain Haiwan of the Altarian delegation. "Some worlds can focus on rebuilding and defending. Others can work on reaching out to enslaved galaxies. Still others can explore new technologies or develop new forms of government. The key is that each choice is made freely, not imposed by a central authority." The assembly voted to adopt Elder Wu Jin's proposal. The galaxy would become not a single unified civilization, but a collection of free civilizations working together by choice rather than compulsion. Admiral Deho found himself appointed as coordinator of the Interdimensional Liberation Project, tasked with finding ways to reach other enslaved galaxies. Captain Miran volunteered to lead the first expedition to attempt contact with beings in other realities. Dr. So-Young began working with scientists from dozens of species to develop new technologies that could function across dimensional boundaries. The project would take decades, maybe centuries, but for the first time in 30,000 years, the galaxy had the luxury of thinking in terms of its own future, rather than simply surviving the present. But perhaps the most important change was happening on individual worlds across the galaxy. Beings who had lived controlled lives for millennia were learning to make their own choices, to take responsibility for their own mistakes, to dream their own dreams. On some worlds, this led to conflicts as different groups disagreed about the future. On others, it sparked golden ages of art and scientific discovery. Some species chose to remain isolated while others formed new alliances and trade networks. All of this variety, this chaos, this uncertainty, it was exactly what Admiral Deho had hoped for. The galaxy was alive again in a way it hadn't been for 30,000 years. Standing on the observation deck of his ship, looking out at a galaxy full of free worlds making their own choices, Admiral Deho reflected on what they had accomplished. The Council's great illusion hadn't just been the false peace. It had been the belief that someone else should be responsible for making the hard choices, that security was more valuable than freedom, that it was better to be safely controlled than dangerously free. Humanity's gift to the galaxy hadn't been superior technology or military might. It had been the simple, stubborn insistence that freedom, with all its risks and uncertainties, was worth fighting for. The galaxy would face new challenges. Some species might make poor choices. There might be conflicts, even wars. But whatever happened would be the result of free choice, not imposed control. And in the dark between galaxies, human ships were already being prepared for the long journey to other enslaved realities, carrying with them the most dangerous weapon in the universe, the idea that every conscious being had the right to determine its own destiny. The illusion was broken. The galaxy was free, and the real adventure was just beginning. Fleet Admiral Kyung-ho stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship as the largest space battle in galactic history unfolded around him. 3 months had passed since the awakening began, and now the Council had revealed its true nature. The enemy ships were nothing like the sleek peacekeeping vessels the galaxy had known for 30,000 years. These were massive, organic-looking constructs that seemed to feed on the energy around them. As they moved through space, they left behind empty zones where even light seemed dimmer. "Sir," called Captain Jamin from his tactical station, "the Altarian defense fleet is reporting heavy losses. Those Council ships are doing something to their crews." Admiral Kyung-ho watched the battle display with grim understanding. "They're draining them, the same way they've been draining the entire galaxy for millennia, but faster and more directly." Dr. Yunsu's voice crackled over the communication system from the science vessel behind the main battle line. "Admiral, I've analyzed the energy patterns from those Council ships. They're not just weapons platforms. They're collection devices. They're harvesting the life force, the creativity, the very essence of everything they encounter. How is that possible? The Council isn't from this dimension originally. They're parasites that move between realities, feeding on the potential energy of conscious beings. Every species they've guided has been slowly drained to feed their expansion into new galaxies." The revelation struck Admiral Kyung-ho like a physical blow. Humanity had suspected the Council's control was unnatural, But this was worse than they had imagined. The galaxy hadn't just been enslaved, it had been slowly consumed. All ships fall back to defensive positions, he ordered. We need time to develop new tactics. But as the human fleet retreated, something unexpected happened. The awakened species throughout the galaxy began arriving to help. Ships appeared on sensors from dozens of different civilizations, all converging on the battle zone. Commander Miran, the youngest fleet captain, opened a channel to the approaching reinforcements. This is the Human Liberation Fleet. You're flying into a war zone. Recommend you maintain safe distance. The response came from Captain Haiwan of the reformed Altarian Navy. With respect, Commander, this is our war too. The Council has been feeding on our people for thousands of years. It's time to end this. More voices joined the channel. Captain Bo Sung of the Vegan Merchant Marine. Commander Su Jin of the Zephyrian Warrior Fleet. Captain Wu Young of the Carillion Science Corps. Species that had been kept separated and controlled for millennia were now working together by choice. Admiral, called Communications Officer Taiwan, we're receiving tactical data from all the Allied fleets. They've been developing new technologies based on their recovered memories and our psychic immunity systems. Admiral Kyung-ho smiled for the first time since the battle began. Show me. The displays filled with information. The Altarians had developed shields that could reflect the Council's draining attacks. The Vegans had created communication networks that couldn't be intercepted or jammed. The Zephyrians had rediscovered weapons that could damage the Council's reality-bending technology. All Allied ships, Admiral Kyung-ho broadcast, coordinate your attacks with the human fleet. Let's show the Council what free species can accomplish when they work together. The battle resumed, but this time it was different. Where before the Council ships had faced scattered resistance, now they encountered coordinated attacks from dozens of different civilizations, each contributing their unique strengths to the fight. But the Council had one more revelation to share. As the combined fleet pressed their attack, space itself began to change around the Council's core ships. Reality seemed to fold and twist, and suddenly, the human sensors were detecting something impossible. Sir, Dr. Yunsu called from her ship, her voice tight with fear. I'm reading energy signatures from outside our galaxy. The Council is opening some kind of gateway. Through the dimensional tear came ships unlike anything in the galaxy's databases. They were sleek, silvery vessels that seemed to phase in and out of existence as they moved. These were not the Council's local forces. These were reinforcements from their home reality. Admiral, Captain Jamin reported, the new ships are broadcasting on all frequencies. The message is in an unknown language, but our computers are translating it. Let me hear it. The voice that filled the bridge was cold and emotionless. Resistance organisms detected in Sector 7739. Initiating sterilization protocol. All biological matter in this galaxy will be processed within standard time parameters. Admiral Kyung-ho felt the weight of the moment. The Council wasn't just trying to maintain control. They were preparing to destroy the galaxy entirely rather than lose it to freedom. All ships, emergency broadcast to every world in the galaxy, he ordered. Tell them what's happening here. Tell them this is their last chance to choose freedom or consumption. Across the galaxy, the message spread faster than light through the networks the awakened species had built together. On thousands of worlds, beings who had spent their lives in peaceful submission suddenly understood what was at stake. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships began appearing throughout the galaxy. Not just military vessels, but civilian transports, cargo haulers, even personal craft modified with whatever weapons their owners could create. Species that had never fought in their entire recorded history took up arms to defend their right to exist as free beings. Sir, called Commander Miran, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Every awakened world is launching everything that can fly. It's not just a fleet anymore, it's an entire galactic uprising. The Council's dimensional gateway continued to pour forth ships, but now they faced not just the human fleet or even the awakened military forces. They faced the combined will of an entire galaxy that had remembered what it meant to be free. On his flagship, Council Prime Vel Turan watched the resistance with something that might have been admiration. They fight well for cattle, he observed to his subordinates, but they cannot win. We have consumed 1,000 galaxies. This one will be no different. But Dr. Yunsu had made another discovery. From her science vessel, she broadcast to all Allied ships. "I've found their weakness. The Council ships need to maintain a connection to their home dimension to function here. If we can disrupt that connection, how do we do that?" Admiral Kyung-ho asked. "We need to generate a massive psychic pulse, something that will interfere with their dimensional anchor. But it would require the focused will of millions of conscious beings." Across the galaxy, the awakened populations heard the plan. On world after world, beings who had never used their psychic abilities began focusing their thoughts on a single goal: severing the Council's connection to their home reality. The effect was immediate. The Council's ships began to flicker and fade as their dimensional anchor weakened. The gateway started to collapse, but Council Prime Velturin had one final gambit. As his ships began to fail, he broadcast a message that reached every mind in the galaxy, awakened or not. You choose chaos over order, suffering over peace, uncertainty over guidance. Very well. But remember this when your wars begin again, when your species destroy each other in their quest for dominance. We offered you paradise, and you chose hell. Admiral Kyung-ho responded with a message of his own, broadcast to every being in the galaxy. We didn't choose hell. We chose the right to make our own choices, good or bad. We chose the right to grow, to learn, to become more than we were. That's not hell. That's life. The gateway collapsed, taking the Council's reinforcements with it. The remaining Council ships, cut off from their power source, drifted helplessly in space. The war was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. A galaxy that had been controlled for 30,000 years was now free to determine its own destiny. Some species would choose wisely. Others might make mistakes, but for the first time in millennia, the choice would be theirs to make. The rebellion began on Vega Station, a trading hub that had served the Council faithfully for 15,000 years. General Namsu watched the uprising unfold through his ship's sensors, impressed by what he saw. The Vegan traders, awakened by the human signal, had spent 3 days remembering who they used to be. They recalled the great merchant fleets that once carried goods and ideas between star systems. They remembered the time before Council permits and restrictions, when any being could travel freely across the galaxy. "Look at them go," said Captain Dong-hyun, Namsu's second-in-command. "They're not just rebelling against the Council. They're rebuilding their entire civilization." On the station's main docking bay, beings from a dozen different species worked together to modify their ships. Where once they had used slow, Council-approved engines, they were now installing faster systems based on half-remembered designs. The Council's safety regulations were being thrown out in favor of innovation and speed. Namsu opened a communication channel to the station. "This is General Namsu of the Human Liberation Fleet. Do you require assistance?" The response came from Hye Jin, a Vegan trader who had become the unofficial leader of the rebellion. "We thank you, General, but we are remembering how to help ourselves. Our ancestors built these stations without Council guidance. We can rebuild them the same way. What about Council forces? Our sensors show 3 peacekeeping ships approaching your system." Hee-jin's laugh carried across the channel. "Let them come. We have remembered something the Council hoped we would forget. We know how to fight." Namsu watched as the modified Vegan ships launched from the station. They moved with a grace and speed that Council vessels could not match. When the peacekeeping fleet arrived, they found themselves outmaneuvered by traders who suddenly remembered that their ancestors had been warriors as well as merchants. The battle was over in minutes. The Council ships, designed for intimidation rather than combat, retreated in confusion. Status report from across the sector called Dr. Ji-hai from her position at the science station. Similar uprisings are occurring on 37 worlds. Species are not just remembering their histories, they're remembering technologies that were suppressed or forgotten. Namsu nodded. This was exactly what the human fleet had hoped for. What kind of technologies? The Altarians are rebuilding their quantum computers. The Zephyrians are reconstructing their energy shields. Most importantly, several species are beginning to develop their own versions of our psychic immunity technology. This last point was crucial. The humans had spent 30,000 years in exile learning to shield their minds from Council control. But they had always known that lasting freedom would require every species to develop its own defenses. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Dae-ho received reports from liberation commanders across the galaxy. The awakening was accelerating beyond all projections. Entire star systems were throwing off Council control and beginning to rediscover their potential. But the reports also contained warnings. "Sir?" called Communications Officer Taman. "We're receiving a message from Council Prime on Nexus Prime. They're requesting a meeting." Admiral Deho considered this. In 30,000 years of exile, the Council had never attempted direct communication with humanity. "Put them through." The image that appeared on the main screen was disturbing. Council Prime Velturan no longer maintained the pleasant humanoid appearance he usually projected. Instead, he appeared as something that hurt to look at directly. A shifting mass of energy and will that seemed to bend space around itself. "Admiral Deho," the Council Prime said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "You have made your point. The galaxy remembers what it was before our guidance. But do you remember what it was like? Do you recall the wars, the suffering, the chaos that we brought to an end?" "I recall the growth," Admiral Deho replied steadily. "I recall the art, the music, the discoveries that came to an end when you arrived. I recall species reaching for the stars instead of waiting for permission to leave their homeworlds. And I recall the Zerian Empire burning 17 star systems in their quest for dominance. I recall the Trillion virus that wiped out 12 species because they insisted on unrestricted biological experimentation. I recall the chaos that freedom brought to this galaxy." Admiral Deho smiled grimly. "You speak of events from 50,000 years ago before your arrival. But what you don't mention is what happened in the galaxies you visited before ours." The Council Prime's form flickered, with what might have been surprise. "Yes, we know about the others," Admiral Deho continued. "We spent 30,000 years in the dark between galaxies, and we found the ruins of civilizations you had guided before us. We learned what happens when species accept your protection for too long." On his home ship, scientist Dr. Yun Su was monitoring the conversation while analyzing data from across the galaxy. What she was discovering confirmed humanity's worst fears about the Council's true nature. "Admiral," she interrupted through the private channel, "the psychic suppression fields aren't just controlling behavior. They're actually draining something from the controlled populations. Intelligence, creativity, the capacity for independent thought. It's all being harvested." Admiral Deho's expression hardened. "Where is it going?" "Unknown, but the energy patterns suggest it's being transmitted outside the galaxy." Back on the main screen, Council Prime Velturan was still speaking. "You cannot maintain this rebellion forever, Admiral. Your awakening signal requires enormous amounts of energy. Your ships will eventually need to resupply, to repair, to rest. We are patient. We have waited 50,000 years to perfect our guidance of this galaxy. We can wait until your resistance fails." "Perhaps," Admiral Deho replied. "But there's something you don't understand about humans, Council Prime. We don't give up, ever." The transmission ended, but its implications were clear. The Council was not going to negotiate. They intended to wait out the human rebellion and then reassert control over the galaxy. But across hundreds of star systems, the awakened species were not waiting passively. On Kepler 7th, the Carillions had begun broadcasting their own version of the human awakening signal. On Sigma Station, a coalition of 12 species was developing new technologies that combined the best discoveries of their individual civilizations. Most importantly, beings throughout the galaxy were beginning to work together, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. Commander Jamin, leading a strike team to liberate another Council facility, reported back to the fleet. "Sir, the awakened populations aren't just resisting Council control. They're building something new. Trade networks, communication systems, defense alliances. All of it voluntary, all of it based on mutual benefit rather than central authority." This was what Admiral Deho had hoped for. The humans had not returned to the galaxy to become its new rulers. They had returned to teach it how to rule itself, but the Council was preparing its response. Deep in the core systems, ancient technologies were being activated. Weapons that had not been used since the Great Pacification campaigns were being brought online. The Council had maintained peace for 30,000 years, but they had not forgotten how to make war. The real test was coming, and it would determine not just the fate of this galaxy, but the future of every civilization that the Council might encounter in their endless expansion across the universe. On worlds throughout the galaxy, beings who had lived peaceful, controlled lives were learning to be free again. They were discovering that freedom was not just the absence of control, but the presence of infinite possibility. They were remembering that the price of growth was uncertainty, and that uncertainty was a small price to pay for the chance to become something greater than they had ever imagined. The chains of 30,000 years were breaking, and the galaxy was beginning to remember what it meant to reach for the stars. Commander Taesung moved through the shadows of Nexus Prime, the Council's capital world. His human stealth suit kept him invisible to most sensors, but more importantly, his mind was shielded from the psychic dampening fields that kept the planet's billions of inhabitants docile. Around him, the great city was beginning to change. In the 3 weeks since the human fleet had arrived at the galaxy's edge, their awakening signal had spread to over 100 star systems. On Nexus Prime, the effects were starting to show. Taesung watched as a group of Altarian workers stopped in the middle of their daily routine. One of them, a tall, blue-skinned female, looked up at the massive council building that dominated the city center. Her name was Hee-won, and she was beginning to remember things. "Why do we build monuments to beings we have never seen?" she asked her companion, her voice full of confusion. "Why do we sing praises to the council every morning when none of us have ever spoken to a council member?" Her friend, another Altarian named Byung-ho, nodded slowly. "I had a dream last night," he said. "I dreamed that my grandfather was a ship captain. He commanded a vessel that could cross the galaxy in days, not months. But that's impossible. My family has always been factory workers." Taesung smiled grimly. The awakening was working faster than they had hoped. He touched the communicator in his ear. "Command, this is Ground Team 7. The memory restoration is accelerating on Nexus Prime. Estimate full population awakening within 2 months." The voice of Admiral Daeho crackled through the device. "Understood. How are the council forces responding?" "They're panicking," Taesung replied. "Their peacekeeping fleets are stretched thin trying to contain the awakening on dozens of worlds. But they're not attacking our ships directly yet." "They're waiting for something," Admiral Daeho said. "Stay alert." Taesung ended the transmission and continued through the city. What he saw everywhere confirmed his reports. Beings from dozens of species were remembering their true histories. The Carillions were recalling their ancient libraries, burned by council order 10,000 years ago. The Vethians remembered their star-spanning empire, reduced to a single system by council. Protection. The Zephyrians were beginning to question why they had given up their warrior traditions for peaceful farming, but the most shocking discoveries were being made by the humans who had remained in the galaxy. Taesung found one such human in the lower levels of the city. Elder Wu Jin was over 200 years old, kept alive by council medical technology. But unlike the humans who had fled to the dark between galaxies, Wu Jin and others like him had stayed behind, their memories suppressed like everyone else's. "I remember now," Wu Jin said when Taesung found him in the abandoned subway tunnels. "I remember the day we chose to resist the council's offer of peace. Most of us left the galaxy that day, but some of us stayed behind to watch and wait." "What do you remember about the war?" Taesung asked. Wu Jin's eyes grew distant. "It wasn't really a war, not the way the council tells it. We never fought them with weapons. We fought them with ideas. We showed other species what they were giving up in exchange for the council's protection. We helped them remember what it felt like to be free, and the council couldn't allow that." "No," Wu Jin said. "So they branded us as dangerous rebels and told the galaxy we had started a war of conquest. When we left, they said we had been defeated, but we both knew the truth. We were coming back." Above them, in the upper levels of Nexus Prime, the council was indeed panicking. Emergency sessions were being held in the great chambers where the galaxy's fate had been decided for 30 millennia. For the first time in ages, the council members themselves were taking direct action instead of working through their controlled species. Council Prime Vel-Turan, a being so ancient that his original form had been forgotten, addressed the emergency assembly. His voice carried across the chamber through psychic amplification, but even that was being disrupted by the human signal. "The human plague spreads faster than our models predicted," he announced. 17 core systems have already fallen to complete awakening. Their populations are refusing council guidance and beginning unauthorized projects." "What kind of projects?" asked Council Member Zixmara. "Weapon development. Faster-than-light communication networks outside our control. Worst of all, they are questioning the necessity of our guidance. Belteron's form shimmered with agitation. On Kepler 7, they have begun dismantling our psychic dampening stations. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The dampening stations were the foundation of council control. Without them, every species in the galaxy would remember what they had been before the council's arrival. We must activate the Harmony Protocol, declared Council Member Nixvold. End this awakening permanently. The Harmony Protocol has never been tested on such a scale, Velturon replied. It could damage the subjects beyond repair. Better damaged subjects than free subjects, Nixvold countered. We cannot allow this galaxy to develop as the humans did in their original home. You all remember what happened to the Builders when they achieved true independence. The chamber fell silent. The Builders had been the Council's first great failure, a species so advanced that they had transcended the need for physical form. When the Council had tried to control them, the Builders had simply left for another dimension, taking their knowledge with them. The humans pose the same threat, Velturon continued. But unlike the Builders, they are not content to simply leave. They want to free every species in the galaxy from our guidance. Meanwhile, on the human fleet flagship, Admiral Deho was receiving reports from across the galaxy. Dr. Yu Jin, the fleet's chief scientist, presented her analysis of the awakening process. The psychic dampening effect is breaking down faster than we anticipated, she reported. Entire populations are recovering memories going back thousands of generations. Some species are remembering technologies that the Council suppressed so long ago that we have no record of them. Any signs of Council retaliation? Admiral Deho asked. Their peacekeeping fleets are mobilizing, but they seem reluctant to use force. I think they're afraid that open warfare will accelerate the awakening process. Captain Boram, the youngest human fleet commander, spoke up from her position at the tactical display. Sir, we're receiving messages from awakened populations across the galaxy. They're asking for help, for weapons, for technology to resist Council control. Admiral Deho considered this. The plan had always been to awaken the galaxy gradually, allowing each species to rediscover their independence at their own pace. But the process was moving faster than anyone had expected. We stick to the plan, he decided. We continue broadcasting the awakening signal, but we don't arm the awakened populations yet. They need to remember not just who they were, but why freedom is worth fighting for. And if the Council attacks? Boram asked. Admiral Deho smiled. Then we remind them why we left the galaxy in the first place. We show them what 30,000 years of preparation has taught us about the value of freedom. Across the galaxy, the awakening storm continued to spread. On world after world, beings who had lived peaceful, controlled lives for millennia were beginning to ask dangerous questions. They wanted to know who they had been before the Council's peace. They wanted to know what they had given up, and whether they could get it back. The Council's great illusion of benevolent guidance was cracking, and through those cracks the light of remembered freedom was beginning to shine. The deep space monitoring station at the edge of the galaxy had been quiet for 300 years. Commander Haiwan of the Zephyrian Defense Corps checked her instruments again, frowning at the readings. Something was moving out there in the dark between galaxies, something big. Status report, she called to her crew. The station was small, just 12 beings from different species, all serving the Cosmic Harmony Council that had kept peace in the galaxy for 30,000 years. Multiple contacts. Commander, replied sensor operator Veltar, his 6 eyes focused on the displays. At least 50 ships, maybe more. They're not using any technology we recognize. Haiwan felt a strange chill. In her 40 years of service, she had never seen anything like this. The ships appeared on sensors but gave off no energy signatures. They moved without leaving warp trails. They seemed to drift through space like ghosts. Send a message to Council Command, she ordered. Unknown fleet approaching from deep space. Request immediate backup. But as she spoke, something odd happened. The words felt heavy in her mouth, as if she was speaking through thick air. Around the control room, her crew began to look confused. Veltar's eyes unfocused for a moment. Commander, he said slowly, I'm receiving something. It's not a normal transmission. What kind of transmission? It's like a song, but not in any language I know. Yet somehow, I understand it. Haiwan moved to his station. Through the speakers came a sound that was indeed like singing, but deeper than any voice she had ever heard. As she listened, strange images began to form in her mind. She saw her homeworld, but not as she remembered it. In these visions, her people lived in great cities that touched the clouds. They built ships that could travel between stars without the Council's permission slips. They made art and music that filled entire planets with joy. "This is impossible," she whispered. "We never had such cities. My people have always been simple traders." But the song continued and more memories surfaced. Not her memories, but the memories of her entire species. She saw the day the Council ships arrived at her homeworld. She saw her people's leaders meeting with beings who spoke of peace and order. She remembered the great machines that the Council built, machines that hummed with quiet power and made everyone feel calm and happy. Too calm. Too happy. "Commander," Feltar's voice cracked with fear. "The fleet is responding to our transmission. They're sending their own message." The screen flickered and a face appeared. It was unlike any species in the Council database. The being had 2 eyes, dark hair, and pale skin. Its features were simple but somehow familiar. "Greetings," the being said in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Deho of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We have returned home." He once stared at the screen. "Terran? You mean human? But humans are extinct. They died out in the Great War 30,000 years ago." Admiral Deho smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "That is what you were told." "We did not die, Commander, we left. And now we have come back to finish what we started." The transmission cut off, but the singing continued. All around the control room, HFY's crew was experiencing the same awakening she was. Each species was remembering things that had been hidden from them for thousands of years. "Commander," called Communications Officer Zixval, her voice shaking. "I'm getting reports from monitoring stations across the sector. The same thing is happening everywhere the human song reaches. Crews are remembering things." HFY tried to focus on her duty. She had sworn an oath to the Council to maintain peace and order. But the memories kept coming. She remembered when her people first discovered faster-than-light travel. She remembered the wars they had fought, not against each other, but against those who would control them. She remembered the day her ancestors chose to submit rather than die. "Send another message to Council Command," she ordered. But her voice lacked conviction. Tell them the humans have returned." 3 hours later, Council ships arrived at the monitoring station. But something was wrong. The crews moved like sleepwalkers. Their ships drifted in space without purpose. When HFY tried to contact them, the responses were confused and slow. "What did you do to them?" she demanded when Admiral Deho appeared on screen again. "We did nothing," the human replied. "We simply reminded them who they used to be." The Council's control works through psychic suppression fields generated by large installations throughout the galaxy. Our ships broadcast a counter-frequency that disrupts those fields. "But the peace," HFY protested. "The Council brought us 30,000 years of peace." "Did they?" Admiral Deho asked. "Or did they bring 30,000 years of sleep? When did your people last create something new? When did they last explore beyond their assigned sectors? When did they last ask questions about how the galaxy works?" HFY opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She realized that her people had done none of those things. Neither had any of the Council species. They had simply existed following orders, maintaining systems they had not built and did not understand. "The Council will send their full fleet against you," she warned. "Let them come," Admiral Deho replied. "We have spent 30,000 years preparing for this day. We learned things in the dark between galaxies that would surprise even the Council. Most importantly, we learned to remember who we are." As if to prove his point, more human ships appeared on sensors. Hundreds of them now, all singing that strange song that awakened sleeping minds. Across the sector's space stations and planets were reporting the same phenomenon. Beings who had been content for millennia were suddenly asking questions. They wanted to know why they had never been told about their own history. They wanted to know who they had been before the Council's peace began. On her homeworld, HFY's people were looking up at the stars for the first time in centuries and wondering what lay beyond their small corner of space. On 1,000 other worlds, similar awakenings were taking place. The galaxy was waking up from a very long dream, and it was beginning to remember what it had lost in exchange for peace. The humans had returned, but they had brought something more dangerous than weapons or advanced technology. They had brought the memory of freedom. Admiral Deho's image faded from the screen, but his final words echoed through the station. "The Council told you we were dead. They were wrong. We are very much alive, and we have not forgotten what they did to our galaxy. The real war begins now." Hewan looked around her control room at her crew, all of them changed by what they had remembered. The peaceful order of 30,000 years was crumbling, and she realized that she was glad to see it fall.